Hi, and welcome to Conversations with B'nai B'rith. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. Thanks for being with us today. Today, we're speaking with Doron Spielman, author, IDF officer, and for more than 2 decades, a central figure in one of the most extraordinary archaeological efforts in the world, the rediscovery of the ancient city of David, just outside Jerusalem's Old City. His new book, When the Stones Speak, The Remarkable Discovery of the City of David and What Israel's Enemies Don't Want You to Know, here's the book, tells how these excavations have uncovered powerful evidence of the Jewish people's 3,800-year connection to the land, evidence that stands in direct opposition to those who seek to erase it. We'll talk about these remarkable discoveries and what they reveal about Jewish history, why the excavation of the city of David has become such a flashpoint, and how Spielman views the struggle over truth and legitimacy in light of October 7th. But before we get into our conversation, a quick reminder, if you enjoyed this program, subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a rating. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and stay updated with all of our latest content. Doron Spielman is the New York Times best-selling author and the writer of When the Stones Speak, The Remarkable Discovery of the City of David and What Israel's Enemies Don't Want You to Know. A major in the Israel Defense Forces Reserves, Doron serves as an international spokesman, appearing on CNN, Fox News, BBC, Sky News, and more. Born and educated in the United States, he moved to Israel in 2000. As vice president of the City of David Foundation for more than 2 decades, he worked to transform the site from a neglected hilltop into one of the most important archaeological destinations in the world, uncovering and preserving discoveries that illuminate the deep historical connection between the Jewish people and Jerusalem. He's currently senior fellow at the Cherut Center in Jerusalem. Doron, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. It's really a pleasure and an honor.
Well, the first question you ask an author, and particularly with a book like this, to start, tell us about your own path. How did your background as an IDF officer and your interest in history lead you to archaeology and ultimately to the city of David? And how has that journey changed your life?
Thank you for the question. It's a great question. And every time I'm asked it, I have to think deeply to give the answer, search inside myself. You know, Dan, I wrote this book twice, the truth is. The first time was very much about what you said. As an IDF officer, already back in the early 2000s, when I was serving in Bethlehem, it's a story I relate to in the book. I had just come to Israel from Detroit. I'd made Aliyah. The Second Intifada broke out. There were buses blowing up in the streets, and the army made me a spokesman to the foreign press. And I had a run-in during that opportunity where I, via a posting I had in Bethlehem, had a run-in with a group that was the precursor of BDS. People did not know at that point what BDS is, boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. This was before those days. The initial movement was called ISM, the International Solidarity Movement. And what this really created was a group of people who were seeking to aid Hamas terrorists early on and try to defame Israel's name, something that now we're completely aware of. But back then, what happened was I was in Bethlehem at the Church of the Nativity, where Hamas had hidden amongst hostages inside the church, and I was outside doing spokesmanship. And a group of these ISM members tried to break into the confines of the church to provide them with food. So we're talking college students, anti-Israel, early 2000s, before BDS tried to break in, and we arrested them. And the leader of that group was somebody I know. I went into great detail about this in the book. She and I have a history and the background of the city of David together. And what she told me during the 10 hours that I spent with her, debriefing her essentially of her worldviews, made me wake up to the idea that Hamas and the Palestinian Authority had really inculcated and indoctrinated an entire generation that believes Jewish history about Israel equals zero, meaning they were inculcated to believe that this is all a fable and a fantasy, and the original person in Jerusalem was Muhammad. And this, of course, defies Jewish history, defies our entire connection to Israel. These were the claims that she made. And I left that experience deeply shaken. And so that was as a spokesperson. And as you know, in Israel, we go from being in the army back to work. So at the time I was working in high tech. My parents were very proud of me to move to Israel and work in high tech. But I just couldn't get this woman's voice out of my head. She, just the consistent claim that we have no connection to our land whatsoever. And by the way, her solution was that Israel will just allow all the Arabs back into Palestine back to 1948. And my questions to her was, well, that will spend the end of Israel. Was no, you can live here, but it will be as it was in 1948. So there was no point of connection. So I go back to my high-tech job and I'm deeply shaken. And I really felt I had to do something to serve the Jewish people. And as the Jewish journey would have, I was introduced to somebody that I was told was either a Renaissance man or the head of a militia, depending how you relate to him at the time. His name was David Leberi. He was the former head of Duvdevan, which is Israel's undercover unit, and he had uncovered the ancient city of David. It had been uncovered before, but he really brought it back to life, and he had a small excavation taking place outside the walls of Jerusalem, and I brought my fiance there, and we went on a tour with him, and it was incredible to see how he was actually unearthing the true antiquities that prove Jewish history going back thousands of years with the very names of them from the Bible. And at this point in time, nobody was really on board with the project. And he offered me a position. It really was very low paying, but I felt this was the answer. This was going to become a major answer to what I saw and that tremor, that precursor from Bethlehem.
Well, I've had the great privilege on several trips to Israel over the years to have seen and had a tour of the city of David. But for those who are not familiar with it, describe exactly where it is. How close to the Western Wall? When was it built? And why is this site so important to Jewish history?
It's ironic, but every old city in the world is located inside its old city walls. I mean, that would make sense. Whether you go to Prague or wherever you go in the world, every major European capital and throughout the Middle East, it's always inside the old city walls, except for one. And we always have to be different, right, than the rest of the world. Jerusalem is actually ancient Jerusalem. The most ancient part of Jerusalem is not inside those old city walls. What is inside those old city walls is a very old city. By any comparison, it is 2,000 years old. Relates to the Second Temple. However, Jerusalem, going back to the time of King David, going back to the time of the actual Bible, is on a small hilltop that was forgotten over time outside of the old city walls. That is called the city of David. It was built by King David. And what happened over the years was this was forgotten since it's lower down in the valley, it's not very accessible. And once human beings were able to bring water to the upper city, the old city became dominant, what we call the old city, but the actual city of David became forgotten completely off the map. And that was until Queen Victoria in 1867 sent out a series of explorers to find the Ark of the Covenant. And one of them noticed outside the old city walls, about 100 meters, 100 yards from the old city walls, a spring of water. His name was Captain Charles Warren. He finds this freshwater spring, which is a rare thing in Israel, and he goes in and he's drinking the water and he sees it leads into a cave. And he walks into a cave. It's right out of Indiana Jones. And as he goes through the cave with his lantern, he sees over his head a shaft going right up through this cave. So he calls in his excavation crew that were looking for the Ark, and he says, let's check this place out. And they go into this water tunnel, build up scaffolding through this shaft, and they end up in an underground city. And even back then in the 1860s and 1870s, they realized the archaeology that they were pulling out of the ground was bronze and early iron, meaning much older than the old city. And further exploration uncovered that this was in fact the buried city of Jerusalem. And the reason why this is so important is because 1.5 to 2 billion people in the world look at the Bible as a living document of their history, their spiritual history. That's Christianity, in fact, parts of Islam. And for us, the Jews, our genetic history, literally our actual DNA is linked to the Middle East by all major DNA studies. And that Bible is a living document. And so therefore, when you find the original city from the Bible. And the Bible becomes a tour book, and you can go underneath the ground and find treasures that have names on them from the Bible. It sends out a message to 2 billion people saying, this is not just fantasy. There is fact inside this book, and it is your identity. And when that happened, it created 2 shockwaves. One was very positive, where people around the world were delighted and engaged and inspired. And the other one was to Israel's enemies, extremely threatening because of what I said at the beginning, that they had created a narrative that Jewish history had been erased.
So the title of your book is When the Stones Speak. What do the stones tell us? What are you trying to bring not only to light, but to life? And why is this an important moment to share it?
Well, the title of The Stones Speak comes from a woman. Her name is Dr. Eilat Mazar. Unfortunately, she passed away around 5 years ago. She was a firebrand of an archaeologist. She always believed that the Bible should be used as a legitimate historical document in digging throughout Israel. And there were plenty of people, it's a longer story, that had really thrown away that school and said the Bible can't be looked at in terms of fact. The Bible's a mythological book similar to the Knights of the Round Table and many other, mythologies like Greek mythology, and couldn't be used. But Dr. Mazar stuck to her guns, and she was the first one to dig in the upper area of the city of David and find a massive palace that she dated to King David's period. And the reaction, again, was twofold. Some archaeologists came and looked at it and looked at the dating and the pottery and the carbon dating. The carbon dating matched up, but there was very little of it, and said, wow, this looks like King David's palace. But a whole other group of archaeologists said it cannot be. You're out on a limb. It's not connected to David. It's not even biblical. And Dr. Mazar said the following words. She said, you know what? We can argue, but let the stones speak. The stones are not affected by politics. They're not affected by spin. They can't be manipulated. Let the stones tell the story. And what ended up happening was, about a year later, Dr. Mazar unearthed 2 clay seals from inside this palace with names on them. Both of those names are written in the Bible just behind me, from the book of Jeremiah. They are the names of 2 people that were the senior ministers in the court of Zedekiah, who was a king that was a direct descendant of David, and is completely recorded in the Bible. And when that happened, the stone spoke. And the power of the stone speaking both tell us about our past, but it also tells us where we're going. Because, and this relates to your question about why this is important right now. The Jewish people are carrying out right now the most justified war, perhaps in recent history. Meaning it is a war that we were attacked, brutally attacked, slaughtered, killed. I was there in the early days, the 8th, the 9th. I was down south. And we were attacked in our own borders by a population that was there to kill us. And in response, we are now fighting a war to really eliminate that group called Hamas and any offshoots of them. However, as we know by looking around and turning on the news, there is an onslaught against us everywhere we look, whether it is the United Nations or whether it is the media, and I have a media appearance right after this to try to defend Israel against the new charges that Israel is causing hunger in Gaza. At these moments in time, Dan, we need a solid foundation to stand on that tells us to continue our path and not be swayed by the world. Doesn't mean we don't have a heart. It doesn't mean we're not sensitive to people in Gaza. It doesn't mean we're not sensitive. It means that we have to hang on to our own moral barometer. And when you go to the city of David and you see the bedrock that has been sitting there for 3,000 years, that has been there through the Holocaust and before then through the exile from Rome and the destruction of Babylon against the Jews, and that foundation of Jewish history has been sitting there, it tells us a story that we have a strong foundation that we've gone on, a strong moral code. Stay on that foundation and we will continue the Jewish history into the future. And that's why this is so important right now. And also, if I may just add one other thing, with all these charges that are being made on university campuses, and I know B'nai B'rith has played such an important role here. By the way, I'm from a B'nai B'rith family. It was one of the first Hebrew words I ever knew was B'nai B'rith, and my father was part of the bowling league, and my mother was heavily involved, and it was a major part of my Jewish identity. And in Detroit, knowing that B'nai B'rith is involved on these campuses and involved in supporting students, these students are under attack like Israeli soldiers are under attack. But the charge against them is that you are colonizers, you are outsiders, you are imposters, and you're defending a country that has no connection to the land. And when you read the book, what it does is it takes apart those claims and explains the real story that not only do we have a connection to the land, perhaps no other people in the world have more of a connection to any land than we have to ours. And the book, At God's True Divine Wisdom, was written and published during this time period. And it reached an enormously wanting and desiring crowd of people.
No, of all of the charges that are being leveled against Israel, what you referenced just now about colonial occupiers, and as if all of this began after 1945. This is, I think, it's the easiest in a way, because really every week we're opening our Tanakh, and these places, not just in Jerusalem, but so many other places in the land, are referenced. And yet, this is a charge that continues to have an unlimited shelf life. And what you've written in the book does so much to respond to that. I just want to talk about dramatic moments, because there are so many in the book, but one in particular stands out. Can you tell us about the monumental staircase uncovered in the city of David, the structure itself, what was involved in revealing it, and its connection to the ancient pilgrimages of Jews making their way up to the temple?
Well, it all goes back, like all good things, to a sewage leak. There was a sewage leak in the city of David in 2004 at the bottom of the site, where truly there was no archaeological activity. We were focused more up towards King David's palace, closer to the Western Wall. This is down about 700 yards away. And there was a sewage leak, and a tractor from the city hall was there digging underneath this hill, this kind of, they were clearing away brush and digging to fix this old sewage main, which was left over by the Brits. And it's pounding on the stone beneath the sewage main, trying to remove the stone. And an archaeologist comes by and he sees this. He says, wait a second, there's not just average stones here. And he gets down on his hands and knees. He clears away where the JCB was digging, and he sees the JCBs breaking through a stair, a pure limestone white stair. And he calls us into the site. I was there within a couple hours. This was June 2004. And we uncovered at the bottom of the city of David a staircase, which led to another staircase and another staircase, until there was a flight of stairs in the mud stretching 180 feet wide, descending beneath what looked to be basically a forest. And it turns out that the staircase led to an ancient pool, which is called in Hebrew, Brichat Shiloach. It's mentioned already 2,700 years ago in Israel that there was a major water drawing source in ancient Israel, in Jerusalem, that was a protected water reservoir. So the residents of the city could drink their water and not be killed by their enemies. And this tractor uncovered this pool. That's how this began. Now, the archaeologists look at this pool and they say, okay, it's for drinking water, but it's so big, it's larger than an Olympic-sized pool. Now, you don't need an Olympic-sized pool to drink. And, the Jews weren't great swimmers. There were no swimming competitions. So they said, what is this thing? And the archaeologist said, you know what? I think I know what this is. In addition to drinking water, this was an ancient mikvah. This is where the people were going en masse to purify before going to the temple. And he said, we always wondered, how could the numbers that we read about be true? They range from 300,000 to 3 million people came just for Passover alone. Where would they use a mikvah? So he said, I believe this is the mikvah. But there's one problem. If this is the mikvah, the temple, as I said, is 600, 700 yards away. You have to walk up without touching a single impure person. If you touch anyone, your brother comes up to you, gives you a hug, you got to go back. So he said, if I'm correct, there has to be a thoroughfare, a pilgrimage thoroughfare. So Professor Ronnie Wright, who because of this became the chief archaeologist of the state of Israel, dug, and we found at first a sidewalk and then a beautiful limestone staircase, stair by stair by stair, heading all the way up. And it goes towards the Western Wall. And we know from pictures that have been taken that it even continues inside the Temple Mount to this day. And what it is, it's miraculous. This predates the Muslim Hajj by thousands of years. And this particular staircase was renovated, so to speak, predates Islam by 700 years. You're looking at the original Hajj of the Jewish people, which was a journey where you grabbed your families, your brothers and sisters. You didn't see them for a year. You said, I'll meet you at this pool in a year. And before Passover, you came together, you had a big barbecue, you ate the Paschal lamb, you ate your matzah, and you moved as a family all the way up to the temple. And the way the sages described this was that this was a moment of Jewish nirvana. It was all the sages were juggling fire and telling stories and eating, and it was a moment of true joy. And we found the beginning of that staircase, and that's, of course, when all heck broke out. But it was an incredible find.
Well, this project has been as much about perseverance as it has been about archaeology. Share a memorable story beyond the staircase from the book and how your team managed to raise the funds needed to keep the excavations going, because I know it's not done just like that. So tell us about that.
It was hard. It was very hard, Dan. I'll tell you why. Because in addition to finding this glorious staircase, which obviously donors and the Jewish people and non-Jews were so excited, there became, similar to today, a very controlled, well-funded campaign against the city of David, and it rested on a few principles. First of all, they said that, and there are Arab homes in the area, and there are also Jewish homes, that the excavations were destabilizing the homes. That was the first charge, which was thrown out at the Supreme Court and found not to be true. However, the Muslim Brotherhood in Israel, which ironically, there's only 2 countries in the entire Middle East that allow the Muslim Brotherhood, Israel being one of them, the Muslim Brotherhood said, we cannot allow this to happen. And they engaged in intimidation and tried forcing our Arab workers to quit. Some quit and some stayed, but we kept digging. We kept digging, and the project was moving forward. And then they said, you know what? If we can't beat them by trying to force the Arab workers to quit, and we can't beat them via intimidation, we're going to go to our friends in the press. And here they simply made press allegations that didn't need an answer, very similar to today. They claimed that kitchens were falling out of homes. It was all buggers. It was absolutely ridiculous. They had people who were showing cracks in their walls. These were cracks from 100 years ago. And they engaged in a massive campaign. And here, an American donor community sees all of these negative press reports and positive ones. It took real courage at the beginning, before these were so clearly thrown out, to be able to support the site. But what we did was we stayed and kept digging. We knew that they wanted us to stop digging. They knew that they thought intimidation, like terror, will freeze us in our place. And it's very interesting. If you stay at your path, you keep digging, you answer the arguments. Eventually, like all things, if you show progress eventually beats the press. It really does. That's why Israel's going to win, ultimately. You have to stay your course. We stayed our course, and what happened was donors began to say, you know what? I don't see any homes that have fallen in. I drive up and down the streets of the city of David, and I see now that the United States government's getting involved, and I see senators are coming, and Congress people are coming, and actors are coming, and Seinfeld came. Each of these moments that someone like this came was another and more positive press. Eventually, they realized, wait a second, this is all part of the anti-Israel propaganda. And what happened was a series of very brave donors from all walks of life really began to support the project. And they're very proud today that they were part of that original crew, and they continue to support it. But I think what they really appreciated, if you ask me, was that we did not allow that terrorism and that intimidation and those claims to beat us down where we had no energy. It was the opposite. We stood strong. We believed in what we're doing was completely legal, and we continued towards our goal. And that strength, even more than the archaeology, is, I think, what drew people to the project.
Well, it's all about, this is the ultimate birthright. This is the ultimate birthright. With apologies, it really is. And the story that you've told, and this unfolding story, because there's more, really speaks to our right to the land, or right to the city, and it speaks to our challenges today. A couple of quick questions before we conclude. Artifacts are at the heart of your book. Which discoveries stand out most to you? The pieces that connect the physical stones to the words of the texts. What's on your favorites list?
It's like choosing between a child, but my children. But I'll bring up a few. So I was sitting in a meeting, I'll never forget this, in the visitor center, of all things, thinking about how we can use robots to explain to people the landscape and point it out, and nothing very ancient. When the archaeologist Eli Shukron comes bursting through the door, I described it in the book, and he puts on the table in front of us, and I was a bit annoyed because, I'm like, Eli, we're in the middle of talking about these fakakta robots, but he puts a clump of clay in the table. And I'm looking, I'm like, what is this? He goes, Spielman. He calls me, goes, no, what is this? So I'm looking, I see a little yellow. I'm like, is there gold in there? He said, that's right. He goes, pick it up. So I pick up this little clump of clay. I'm looking at it, and it's like round. He goes, well, shake it. So I shake it, and I hear a bell inside. I still don't understand. He goes, Spielman, what's gold and has a bell? Where do you hear about golden bells? And I sit back and I realize, whoa. In the book of Exodus, early in the Torah, it describes the temple and the high priest, the Kohen HaGadol, on Yom Kippur and on the holiest days of the year. And he would wear a garment that had golden bells in the shape of pomegranates on the hem of his garment. In all the history of Israel, there has never been an intact 24-karat gold bell with a clasp to be sewn onto clothing ever found. Where did Eli Shukron find this? It was actually Nisim, his assistant, directly next to the Temple Mount beneath the Western Wall. It had slipped from temple times, torn off a garment. We don't know if the Kohen HaGadol, the high priest, was running from the Romans or something else, but it tore off his garment, went through the drain, down beneath the ground. Our excavators beneath this drain, beneath the pilgrimage road, find it 2,000 years later. And it is so magical to see this come alive. And it's beautiful and it's small, that it literally set off bells. So that's definitely one of them. I'll just give you one more, and this is a discovery that was made before my time, but there's nothing like it. The Jewish people were under attack by Assyria. Assyria were the ones that exiled the 10 tribes of Israel. There were only 2 tribes left. They had gobbled up the entire Middle East. They descend on Jerusalem. The Jewish people are about to be erased off the face of the earth. It's 702 BC. They get closer and closer and closer to Jerusalem. And King Hezekiah, King David's great-great-grandson, says, in order for me to survive, I have to hide the water. It's what we were talking about before with Shiloh Pool. He builds, according to the Bible, an underground water system to hide the water from the Assyrians. In fact, they surround Jerusalem. It is the only city on their campaign, which is recorded, you can see it in the British Museum on a column, in which Jerusalem survived. How did they survive from this water tunnel? Inside this water tunnel, a 15-year-old kid uncovered a sign written in ancient Hebrew that describes the construction of a tunnel that is described in the Bible, that is documented by outside evidence written by the king of Assyria in the British Museum, bringing together the modern day ancient Assyria, ancient Israel, and the survival of the Jewish people. So I think that, hands down, is the most powerful thing that has been found.
Well, Doron, just last question. If you can put on your spokesman hat for a moment, we're still fighting this battle, and the onslaught continues. It's a hydra. There are all kinds. It's coming from social media, and it comes from the left, and it comes from the right, and it comes from nation states that are now proposing their own solutions to these intractable issues. I'm not going to ask you for a dissertation, but from what you've seen, you said something a little bit earlier, which I take very seriously, is that ultimately we're going to prevail here. What's in a brief few moments, what's the roadmap here for prevailing? Resilience is one. The resilience of the Israeli people through these 20 months of Gaza, Iran, it's a story by itself. What do you say?
I think it's a combination of two things. It's a combination of success on the ground, and it's a combination of the might of right. We have got to remember how mighty our right is to this conflict and to this land. One without the other isn't going to work. If we just hang on to the might of our right to this land without the military success needed, then we'll be living in an ivory tower, but Israel won't be safe. And if we have the military success without the might, well, we'll have a military success, but the soul of our people will be affected. We have got to, first of all, carry out and continue the military campaign we're doing. We've decimated our enemies throughout the Middle East. It is a miraculous war that it might take 5 years for us to look back and say, oh my God, how did that actually happen? And did it really happen in 2 years? But it's happening. Hamas is near collapse. That's why all of this is happening right now. They are near collapse. We need to finish our method of destroying Hamas. It's extremely difficult, but we will get it done. On the mental side and on the side of our soul, we have got to learn our history and realize something you said. Israel is not here because of 1945. Israel is not an escape from the Holocaust. We are not an arm of colonialism that was just given to the Jews. There were Jews that have never, ever left Israel. Since the destruction of the Second Temple, we are B'nai Brit, literally B'nai Brit. We're the children of a covenant. And that covenant is not 1945. That's the only, in 1948, the common rendition. The covenant goes back to the foundations of our integral connection to this land. And when we know that, we stand up ramrod straight, whether you're in America or Israel, and you have the military success, well, that's really what the Jewish people are about. That brings us back to our roots, and that's what we need to succeed.
When the Stones Speak, the remarkable discovery of the city of David and what Israel's enemies don't want you to know by Doron Spielman. It's available at bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, or wherever you get your books. Doron, thank you for joining us, not only for helping us to see the city of David in a way that connects to past and present, but for your service in the IDF and your service to the Jewish people. Really enjoyed speaking with you and wish you continued success with the book and everything ahead.
God willing. Thank you so much, Dan, and Yashar Koach to you and all of B'nai Brit. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Conversations with B'nai Brit. Our sincere thanks to Doron Spielman for a conversation that took us from the stones of ancient Jerusalem to the challenges Israel faces today. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Share this episode with others, post about it on social media, or leave us a comment or a rating. And to stay updated, follow or subscribe to Conversations with B'nai Brit wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook for more great content. We'll be back soon with more thoughtful conversations on Jewish history, culture, and the issues that matter most to our community. Until then, I'm Dan Mariaschin. Thanks for listening, and take care.